Welcome to the Grateful American Radio Show, hosted by author and publisher David Bruce Smith. What did George Washington do that you might not know about? What did Abe Lincoln know that could change the way you think about the Civil War? You'll learn about all that and more on this special show designed to restore excitement in American history. Let's get started. Hi, this is Hope Gibbs, founder of the Incandescent Radio Network, the voice of entrepreneurs. Welcome to the Grateful American Radio Show. We are here today in Washington, D.C. at the headquarters of David Bruce Smith Publications with David himself, a Washington, D.C.-based author and publisher who recently penned American hero John Marshall, Chief Justice of the United States. David insists you have to know where you came from to know where you're going, and that's why in January 2014, he launched the Grateful American series, a radio show, TV series, and a guidebook. This podcast is our first introduction to the radio show, which will be rolled out in 2014 and beyond. So hello, David. Welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Hope. Thanks for having me.
So let's get right down to it. What is a Grateful American, and what inspired you to develop this Grateful American series?
Okay, the Grateful American series is based on the sentiment of being a grateful American. My father felt the community had been very good to our family, which is a fortunate family, and for that reason wanted to give back. So for the last 15 years of his life in particular, he dedicated himself to giving of his time and his resources to educational projects such as presidential homes. And one of the things that excited him the most was watching kids learn and enjoying it. Because the problem is kids are not being taught history effectively, and with that comes the tendency to slough it off. For a while that might have changed post 9/11, the feeling of patriotism, that is, but now we need the feeling of patriotism without the framework of the crisis. So I think the Grateful American series will help stimulate some of those thoughts.
That's excellent. And you've written a bunch of books, including this book about John Marshall, which actually is for children, which is really cool. And I hope that our listeners know the impact that your family has had, especially on Washington, D.C. and the region. Your father was a big donor to the University of Maryland. In fact, the School of Business at Maryland is named for him. And he made a big impact on your life as a publisher and a writer. So let's talk a little bit about this Grateful American series and how people can dive into the genealogy of the country, which is what you talk about in terms of what you hope it is. It's not just that you can do the genealogy of your family, but you can do the genealogy of the whole country by diving back into the past and learning really what the lessons were of the founding fathers and mothers.
Well, if you're talking about it in terms of a genealogy, that's an interesting framework because when people think of history, they think of a lot of boring dates that most people don't care about. But if you're thinking about history in a more interesting way, you can think of it as one big gossip session, his story, or you can think of it as an ancestry.com on your ancestors. That's what you're really doing. You're doing an ancestry.com on the founding fathers or whatever period of history piques your interest.
Mm-hmm. And studies show that too many Americans, kids especially, aren't knowledgeable about the country's history.
Yeah, there was a study done by the American Revolution Center in 2011. They are in the process of building a museum in Philadelphia which is all about the Revolutionary War. Now, interestingly, there is nothing in this country that is dedicated solely to the Revolutionary War. There are pieces of it here and there, but there's no museum that's specific to it. But their 2011 survey showed that 89% of American adults think that the Revolutionary War came after the Civil War. That shows how serious this problem is and how long it's been going on. If you have an older population believing that, then they weren't taught well either.
Yeah, in fact, a 2010 National Assessment of Education Progress showed that just 13% of high school seniors who took the test had solid academic performance in American history. And the other two grade levels tested didn't perform much better. Just 22% of fourth grade students and 18% of eighth graders scored proficient or better, which is pretty tragic. But adults don't seem to fare much better on tests, as you say. In 2009, the Intercollegiate Studies Institute asked 2,500 randomly selected Americans 33 questions on civic literacy, and 71% of them received an average score of 49%, which is a failing grade, right? So that quiz reveals that more than twice as many people know that Paula Abdul was a judge on American Idol than know the phrase that government of the people, by the people, for the people comes from Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. And that's hard to believe, but unfortunately it's true. What do you attribute that to?
Well, I don't give much credence to tests. I don't think tests mean anything. It just is cramming a bunch of dates that are forgotten immediately. And I think what the tests show, it's not what you don't know. They show what you haven't been taught. And there's a big difference. I think if history were interesting, and by that I mean if it's taught by somebody who's qualified, not just by, a lot of times now, it used to be you were taught by history by someone who had a credential. Now anybody, any teacher in any school, they can say, you teach the history class or you teach the math class. So if you have the right teacher conducting the class, if you have field trips, which, I know the schools have tight budgets, but I don't see why businesses can't be encouraged to underwrite some of that. It's a investment in their future group of employees. Interactive stuff. I mean, there's all kinds of things that weren't available to us. I just think there are a lot of innovative ways to make it more three-dimensional that are not, and the textbooks. I can tell you my children's textbooks were so thick and so abstruse and so boring, and I am a person who likes history. Their texts were so boring, and they're not even about how they cover, well, let's say John Marshall. John Marshall isn't covered until 11th grade, and he gets a paragraph, Marbury versus Madison. But some things aren't covered. It depends on the region of the country. Abraham Lincoln isn't going to be covered the same way in the South as he is in the North, for instance. So even that's got a whole political thing to it.
Yeah, I remember my kids spent years learning about the explorers through Virginia. And I thought, really? Are we going to move on from the explorers? But, there's nothing you can do really as a parent working through the public schools. I think that it's sort of an interesting exploration to educate your kids on your own and taking them to this stuff even when the schools fall behind.
But there's secondary sources that could be used. Diaries of the time, or let's just say, just to pick a secondary source, the Diary of Anne Frank. I mean, that can be read in conjunction with World War II, or the observations that Lincoln's secretaries made about him, instead of just reading some dry paragraph in a textbook. Mm-hmm. I just don't think that teachers are given incentive. I don't think they are given the tools in most cases. And I think it's a fixable problem, but it's going to take a while.
So what are some of your goals for this project?
My goals are, in part, to make history interesting, appreciated, and most importantly, for people to remember to feel loyal and patriotic to the country. I think a lot of that is kind of forgotten.
It's really interesting. So what I'm excited about this project, because we're going to go and talk to the people who run each presidential home: Mount Vernon, Lincoln Cottage, Mount Pelier, Monticello, and Franklin's home in London, and hopefully some others that we'll pick up along the way. Because your goal is to bring the magic of each of these presidential homes and the people that run them, who are very passionate about each of these presidents, to life, which is really exciting. Tell us who your favorite president is and why.
Well, I just want to say all of those presidents, with the exception of Lincoln, and Franklin wasn't a president, but he was a founding father. If it weren't for them, there would be no country as we know it. People need to be reminded of that, and I don't think they're taught that necessarily. My favorite president is Lincoln, and it's for very simple reasons. Ever since I was 6 years old and I discovered that he had freed the slaves, that was enough for me. And think about it, if he hadn't freed the slaves, who would have done it? And when? I mean, that was really the beginning of civil rights. I mean, it wouldn't have been Andrew Johnson, it wouldn't have been Grant, it wouldn't have been Hayes, it wouldn't have been Garfield. Who knows? I mean, he completely changed the country, but he held it together at the same time.
It's fascinating, right? I did a story for Costco magazine. I'm a reporter, and about FDR, and Jonathan Alter, who wrote for Newsweek, he discovered a speech by FDR where Eleanor was actually, and all of his advisors were actually encouraging him to make America a socialist country, and this obviously is decades later. But it's interesting how there's pivotal points in time, Lincoln freeing the slaves, FDR sticking to his belief system, how it formed who we are today. And it's present and it's real, like you're saying. So it's fascinating to bring that to life. What are your thoughts on, how we can get people really excited about this in addition to exposing them to some of this history? Do you think that people have lost their way, or we're just, more concerned about Paula Abdul and American Idol than we are about why we're here and how lucky we are?
I don't think people have lost their way. I don't think they're given away. I think whenever there's, let's call it good programming, people will come. I mean, just stepping outside of history for a second, Downton Abbey is a series that it's a expensive, high quality, well acted, public TV series that nobody expected would go anywhere. And it's the most popular public broadcasting show of all time. Now, to me, that shows if you have good programming, people will come. It's the same thing in a school. If you have a popular teacher who presents something in a new and innovative and creative way, they'll come.
And that's the goal for this series, to create something really interesting and innovative so that we'll get people to come and reignite their passion for history.
Oh yeah, if this series doesn't do that, then it's really a bust.
Well, we're here for making it not a bust, for making it fantastic. But before we move on, let's talk about your passion for the first ladies, because it's definitely the men were out in front, but it was those women that stood behind them that really made a difference. Tell us about who you love, those first ladies.
Those first ladies, some of them were indispensable. I mean, Abigail Adams, for example. I don't think John Adams would ever have made it to the White House without her. He was grumpy, he was difficult, but she leveled him out. Dolly Madison. Dolly Madison was like the Pearl Mesta of her time. She had he had the smarts, the intellectual smarts. She had the street smarts. She had the enthusiasm. She had the personality. And so together, they were a great whole person. So one person said, who ran against, who I can't remember his name, who ran against Madison for the second term, said, you know, I could have won if I just were running against Mr. Madison, but with Mrs. Madison, yeah, I'm paraphrasing, it was an unwinnable election for him. Mary Todd Lincoln, even with her justifiable mental illness, was intelligent. She advised Lincoln well, I think, and she told her family 30 years before that Abraham was going to be president of the United States. And then I think Nancy Reagan is the non-pathological version of Mary Todd Lincoln. She was not able to make it in the movies, so she channeled all of her ambition, love, and energy into his career. And then Eleanor Roosevelt was probably the best first lady in history. She was FDR's legs, ears, and trusted advisor.
It's awesome. Well, you know, as the creator of the Truly Amazing Women series, I'm all for those first ladies. And I think this is going to be an exciting project. So if there's one thing that you hope to accomplish with this project, what would it be?
Excitement and a feeling of heightened patriotism.
Love it. So patriotism without the crisis. That sounds really good. So we are looking forward to more episodes of the Grateful American radio show on the Incandescent Radio Network, the voice of entrepreneurs. And we hope that you continue to listen. Next up, we will be talking to the folks who run Lincoln Cottage, as well as Mount Vernon. So those will be upcoming episodes. Again, you are listening to the Incandescent Radio Network. What's your story? If you have a good one and would like to be interviewed on our show, or you have some thoughts about being a grateful American, send me an email, hope@incandescentpr.com. Thanks so much for listening. You have been listening to the Grateful American Radio Show, hosted by author and publisher David Bruce Smith. Here's to restoring enthusiasm in history for kids and adults too.